Commander Lyra Vasilyev had known she was going to die today. For the past 3 cycles, her precognitive abilities had shown her the same vision: the hull breach, the decompression alarm, and then darkness. As a Tellurian, one of the rare species, gifted with temporal sight, she had accepted this fate with the stoicism her people were known for. What she hadn't foreseen was the human. The explosion rocked the diplomatic vessel harder than expected, sending Lyra flying across the command deck. Warning lights bathed the chamber in crimson as the ship's AI announced what she already knew. Hull integrity compromised in sectors 7 through 9. Emergency protocols activated. All personnel to evacuation pods, she ordered, her silver eyes scanning the damage reports flooding her neural interface. Ambassador Nixtel and delegates first. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, all except for the human attaché, Lieutenant Darius Kava, who was inexplicably running toward the damaged section. "Kava," she shouted through the comms. "Evacuation is the other direction." His voice came back fragmented. "Life signs, trapped engineers, Section 8. Lyra froze. This wasn't in her vision. The timeline was changing. Before she could process this deviation, her Tellurian instinct triggered. Future possibilities cascaded through her mind. Thousands of branching timelines, each showing different outcomes. In every single one where she followed protocol and evacuated, the trapped engineers died. And in every timeline where she followed the human, she couldn't see. For the first time in her life, her precognition failed to show her own fate. "Helm transferred to secondary systems," she announced, locking her station. "First Officer Elodie has command." "Commander?" Elodie's confusion was evident. "Where are you?" "Following the human," Lyra said, already running. "Something's changed." The corridors twisted and warped as the ship's gravity fluctuated. Emergency force fields shimmered at junctions, holding back the vacuum beyond damaged sections. Lyra's specialized physiology allowed her to move faster than most species, closing the gap between her and the reckless human. She caught up to him at a sealed bulkhead, his hands flying over the manual override. "3 engineers trapped," he explained without looking up. "Beam cutters won't work with the interference, but I can get through manually. In my vision, this entire section depressurizes in approximately 4 minutes," Lyra informed him clinically. Kave paused, finally, meeting her gaze. His dark eyes showed no fear, only determination. "Then we have 3 minutes to get them out." "That's not how probability works, Lieutenant. Maybe not for Tellurians." The bulkhead finally released with a hiss. "But humans have a way of changing probabilities." Against every instinct and training protocol, Lyra followed him into the damaged section. She couldn't explain why. Logical analysis suggested they would all die here. Yet something deeper than her precognition pulled her forward. Through smoke and sparking circuitry, they found the engineers, 2 Sci-Fi technicians and a young Morokai apprentice, all trapped behind collapsed infrastructure. "We can't move this," she assessed immediately. Kave's response was to position himself beneath the largest beam. Not alone? No. Understanding dawned as Lyra took position beside him. Together, they strained against the impossible weight, the human's remarkable strength complemented by her Tellurian agility. "On 3, he gasped. The beam shifted. The engineers scrambled through, and then the hull finally gave way. The explosive decompression happened exactly as Lyra had foreseen, except for one crucial difference. As the vacuum pulled them violently toward the breach, Darius Kave grabbed her wrist with one hand, anchoring himself to a support strut with the other. "Hold on," he shouted, though no sound traveled in the vacuum. As darkness crept into her vision, Lyra realized with startling clarity why her precognition had failed. She couldn't see past this moment, because a human had interfered with fate itself. Her last conscious thought before emergency systems engaged was unprecedented. The future was no longer certain. Lyra awakened in the medical bay of the Alliance rescue cruiser Benevolent Purpose, her neural interface chirping with incoming status reports. 26 hours had passed since the explosion, and her body was still adjusting to the emergency stasis the medical team had induced to repair her radiation exposure. "The famous Tellurian precognition failed you, it seems," said a voice to her right. She turned her head to find Lieutenant Kava in the adjacent bed, his left arm encased in a regeneration field. The human's skin was mottled with bruises, but his eyes retained that peculiar intensity she had noticed during their rescue attempt. "It didn't fail," she corrected, sitting up carefully. "It changed. That's unprecedented." "Is it really?" He adjusted his position with a wince. "I thought Tellurians understood probability waves, not absolute futures. We perceive the most likely outcome based on current variables," Lyra explained. "When a future is consistent across all probability scans, it's considered fixed. My death was fixed until you interfered." Kava smiled. "You make saving lives sound like a crime." Before she could respond, Ambassador Nixtel glided into the medical bay, their translucent appendages rippling with chromatic patterns indicating relief and concern. "Commander, Lieutenant," the ambassador's harmonic voice reverberated, "the Alliance Council has been informed of your heroism. The engineers you saved have provided testimony that the explosion was not an accident." Lyra's silver eyes narrowed. "Sabotage?" "Precisely. The evidence points to hegemony operatives." Nixtel's color shifted to solemn blue. "The peace talks have been suspended indefinitely." After the ambassador departed, Lyra turned back to Kava. "You knew," she accused quietly. "Somehow you knew. The explosion wasn't an accident." The human's expression grew serious. "I suspected. The hegemony has attempted similar tactics before. That's why I couldn't leave those engineers. They might have seen something crucial." "And you didn't think to inform your commanding officer?" "There wasn't time," he replied simply. "Would you have believed me without evidence anyway? Humans don't have the best reputation for reliability among Tellurians." He wasn't wrong. Since humanity had emerged onto the galactic stage just 70 years ago, their impulsive nature and disregard for established protocols had earned them as many critics as allies. Yet their adaptability and intuition had proven invaluable during the ongoing Cold War with the hegemony. When Lyra was finally cleared for duty, Admiral Vrek summoned both her and Kave to the command deck. The reptilian officer's scales glistened under the artificial light as he activated the holographic display. "The diplomatic mission was a cover," he explained without preamble. "Intelligence suggested the hegemony was developing a temporal weapon. Your ship was targeted because we had planted information that Tellurian research was aboard." Lyra stiffened. "A weapon that affects precognition?" "Worse," Vrex hissed. "A device that can rewrite causality itself. The engineers you saved had detected unusual temporal fluctuations before the explosion." "That's impossible," Lyra protested. "Even the most advanced Tellurian scientists have only theorized about manipulating time beyond perception." "Admiral," Vrex fixed her with a penetrating stare. "Nevertheless, you two are now the only officers with direct exposure to whatever temporal anomaly was created. And more importantly, you survived it." The implications settled over Lyra like a physical weight. Her precognition had been altered not just by human unpredictability, but by artificial temporal manipulation. "We're assigning you both to a classified reconnaissance mission," Vrex continued. "The Alliance needs to understand what the hegemony has created before they perfect it." As they left the briefing, Kave walked alongside her in uncharacteristic silence. "What is it, Lieutenant?" she finally asked. "I've read about Tellurian partnerships," he said carefully. "When your people work closely with others, sometimes your precognition adapts, creates a temporal bond." Lyra stopped walking. "That's classified information. Not classified enough, apparently." His expression was unreadable. "I need to know, has your future sight returned? And if so, do you see me in those futures?" The question unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Since awakening, her temporal sight had indeed returned, stronger than before. And in every possible future she could perceive, Darius Kava featured prominently. "We should focus on the mission, Lieutenant," she said, avoiding his gaze. The futures I see are irrelevant compared to the threat we face. But as they boarded the stealth vessel that would take them into hegemony space, Lyra couldn't help but wonder why, in every timeline she could perceive, her fate now seemed inextricably linked with this unpredictable human. The hegemony border outpost hung in the darkness like a malevolent spider, its angular constructions betraying the militaristic philosophy of its builders. From the observation deck of their cloaked reconnaissance vessel, Whisper Shadow, Lyra studied the facility where their intelligence suggested the temporal weapon was being developed. Charming place, Lieutenant Kava remarked, joining her at the viewport. All those gun emplacements really add to the ambiance. Lyra didn't respond immediately. For the past 3 days in hyperspace, she had been experiencing increasingly disturbing precognitive episodes, flashes of futures so numerous and contradictory that they left her disoriented. The proximity to whatever temporal technology the hegemony was developing seemed to be affecting her abilities. The insertion point is in the auxiliary research wing, she finally said, calling up the holographic schematics they'd been provided. Minimal security but maximum risk of detection once inside. Kava studied the rotating model. And our exit strategy relies on your ability to foresee guard rotations and security sweeps. Correct. Which might be compromised by the very technology. We're investigating. Lyra met his gaze steadily. I've considered that possibility. That's why I'm going alone. The human's reaction was immediate and predictable. Absolutely not. This isn't a debate, Lieutenant. My precognition is erratic but still functional. Your presence introduces variables I can't account for. That's exactly why I should go, Kava insisted. When your abilities faltered during the explosion, what saved us was adaptation, something humans excel at. Before she could formulate a logical rebuttal, Captain Morinth of the Whisper Shadow interrupted, via the comm system. Commander, Lieutenant, we've detected an anomaly. Some kind of temporal distortion emanating from the outpost. It's expanding. They rushed to the bridge, where the view screens displayed a visualization of space-time around the hegemony facility. Concentric rings of distortion pulsed outward, like ripples in a cosmic pond. They're testing it, Lyra realized, a cold dread settling in her stomach. We're too late. Not yet, Kava countered, studying the readings. These are controlled bursts, not a full deployment. They're still calibrating. Captain Morinth, a veteran Calistan with iridescent skin that shifted colors with her mood, currently displayed a worried purple. The distortion is interfering with our cloaking technology. We have perhaps 20 minutes before they detect us. Lyra made her decision. Prepare the infiltration shuttle. Lieutenant Kave and I will proceed as planned. When Morinth began to object, she added, If we're captured, activate the quantum beacon. The Alliance must know what we've discovered even if we don't return. The journey to the outpost in the small, stealth-equipped shuttle passed in tense silence. As they approached the blind spot in the facility's sensor array, Lyra experienced another precognitive surge, this one clearer than any since the explosion. She saw multiple futures converging on a single point, a laboratory deep within the facility where a device pulsed with impossible energy. I can see it, she whispered, her silver eyes wide. The weapon. It's beautiful. Kava looked alarmed. Commander, are you all right? She blinked, returning to the present. I'm fine. The temporal disruption is actually enhancing certain aspects of my abilities. I can see the weapon's location clearly now. Their docking with the outpost went undetected, and they slipped inside through a maintenance airlock. The interior corridors were eerily empty, not the expected security presence for such a valuable project. I don't like this, Kave muttered, checking his pulse weapon for the third time. Either their security is incompetent or they know we're coming, Lyra finished. Another vision flashed through her mind. Guards waiting around the next corner. Down. They dropped just as disruptor fire scorched the wall above them. 3 hegemony soldiers in full combat gear advanced methodically, firing as they came. Kava returned fire while Lyra calculated their options. Her precognition showed all direct confrontation routes ending in their capture or death. But there was one possibility, strange and uncertain. but potentially viable. "Cover me," she ordered, closing her eyes to focus. Tellurians rarely used their precognitive abilities offensively. It was considered both dangerous and unethical. But Lyra now attempted something only theoretical, projecting her consciousness forward into the most probable timeline, then pulling information back. When her eyes snapped open, she moved with absolute certainty, firing 3 precise shots that shouldn't have been possible given the angles and cover. All 3 guards fell. Kava stared at her. "How did you—" "No time," she interrupted, already moving. "The laboratory is 3 levels down, and something is happening there, something big." As they descended deeper into the facility, Lyra's temporal perception continued to expand abnormally. Past and future seemed to blur together, showing her not just probabilities but actualities across multiple timelines. It was disorienting, exhilarating, and terrifying. When they finally reached the laboratory doors, she hesitated. "What's wrong?" Kave asked, keeping watch on the corridor. "In every future." "I can see where we enter that room," she said slowly. "Something fundamental changes. I can't see beyond it." The human checked his weapon one last time. "Then we'd better make this count." They breached the laboratory together and found it occupied by a single figure, standing before a swirling vortex of energy contained within. A complex apparatus was a hegemony scientist who turned to face them with an expression not of surprise, but of satisfaction. "Commander Vasilyev," the scientist greeted her, "and Lieutenant Kava, right on schedule." Lyra's blood ran cold as recognition dawned. The scientist was Tellurian, one of her own kind. "Impossible," she whispered. The renegade Tellurian smiled. "Not impossible at all. Not when you've seen everything that's about to happen, including your arrival." Octavian Moore. Lyra identified the renegade Tellurian scientist, her voice tight with controlled fury. "You're supposed to be dead," the Tellurian Council confirmed. "Your research vessel was destroyed 5 years ago." The silver-eyed scientist gestured dismissively. "A necessary deception. The Council's short-sightedness regarding temporal research left me no choice but to seek more appreciative partners." Behind Moore, the temporal device pulsed rhythmically, its swirling energy casting unsettling shadows across the laboratory. Lieutenant Kava had positioned himself strategically to cover both the entrance and the device, but his weapon remained lowered, a temporary standoff. "You betrayed your own people," Lyra accused. "Tellurian temporal ethics exist for a reason. This technology could devastate causality itself." "Ethics?" Moore laughed bitterly. "Our people have squandered their gift, using precognition merely to observe and never to shape. Do you know what the hegemony calls your precious ethics? Cowardice." As Moore spoke, Lyra attempted to assess their options using her precognitive abilities, but the temporal distortion emanating from the device created a chaotic tangle of possibilities. She could glimpse fragments of futures, violence, escape, destruction, but nothing coherent. "The device is affecting your sight, isn't it?" Moore observed with clinical interest. "Fascinating. Even with my advanced perception, proximity to the causality engine creates certain blind spots." "Causality engine?" Kave interjected. "Is that what you're calling this abomination?" Moore regarded the human with something approaching amusement. "Humans, always so dramatic. This abomination is the culmination of theoretical work your species hasn't even begun to contemplate. It doesn't just predict the future, it selects it." A chill ran through Lyra as the implications became clear. "You're trying to lock reality into a single timeline. The optimal timeline," Moore corrected. "One where the hegemony achieves its destiny without the chaotic interference of lesser species." His gaze fixed meaningfully on Kava. "Particularly, humans whose very existence seems to generate unpredictability." The device's pulsing accelerated, and Lyra felt each wave like a physical force washing over her temporal senses. Data displays around the laboratory showed countdown sequences approaching completion. "You're activating it now," she realized. This wasn't just a test. Perceptive as always, Commander. Moore stepped toward a control console. The causality engine has been gathering data for months, mapping probability nodes across this sector. Today's activation will lock this region of space into the hegemony optimal timeline. The rest of the galaxy will follow. Cave tensed, his weapon now raised. Step away from the console. Moore smiled thinly. Lieutenant, surely even you can calculate the outcome of firing an energy weapon in a room containing an unstable temporal matrix? Total molecular destabilization, Lyra confirmed grimly. We'd be atomized along with half the station. Kava didn't lower his weapon. Sounds better than letting him rewrite reality. The renegade scientist's expression hardened. You misunderstand your position. You're not here to stop this. You're here because you're part of it. He gestured to Lyra. Specifically, she is. The engine requires a focal point, a Tellurian, precognitive of exceptional strength to serve as its anchor. Horror dawned as Lyra realized the truth. The explosion on the diplomatic vessel, the evidence of hegemony involvement, it was all to drive me here. Very good, Moore nodded approvingly. Though your survival was actually unexpected, we anticipated recovering your body. The human's intervention was an anomaly. As they spoke, Lyra noticed something strange happening. Her erratic precognition was beginning to stabilize, but not in the way she expected. Rather than seeing branching possibilities, she was experiencing a convergence, as if all futures were collapsing toward a single point. That point was Darius Cave. In every remaining timeline fragment she could perceive, the human moved with identical purpose. The realization struck her with unexpected clarity. The unpredictability that humans introduced into Tellurian precognition wasn't a limitation, it was a counterbalance. You miscalculated, she told Moore, a new confidence in her voice. Humans don't just create unpredictability, they create possibility. Moore frowned. What are you? The explosion from the corridor interrupted him, not from Kava's weapon but from a precisely timed detonation at the facility's power junction. The laboratory plunged into darkness before emergency systems activated, casting everything in a dim red glow. In that moment of confusion, Kave moved. Not toward Moore or the console as expected, but toward Lyra, pulling her aside as a section of ceiling collapsed exactly where she had been standing. How did you know? She gasped as they took cover. The human's expression was grim. I didn't, but I saw you looking at that spot repeatedly. Figured your precognition was trying to tell you something. Moore was shouting commands into a communication device, summoning security forces. The causality engine continued to pulse, its energy seemingly unaffected by the power disruption. We need to destroy it, Kava stated flatly. Direct attack is impossible, Lyra replied. But there might be another way. She focused her abilities, pushing through the temporal distortion. The calibration array, there. She pointed to a secondary console across the laboratory. If we invert the causality matrix, it should collapse in on itself. Kava nodded. Cover me. As he moved toward the console, Moore noticed and raised his own weapon. Stop. Lyra acted instinctively, throwing herself into the scientist's line of fire. The energy blast caught her in the shoulder, spinning her to the floor. Pain blossomed, but she maintained consciousness, watching as Cave reached the console and began rapidly inputting commands. Moore advanced on him, weapon raised for a killing shot. You cannot comprehend what you're interfering with, human. Through the haze of pain, Lyra saw something impossible. A perfect convergence of all possible futures into a single moment of choice. With clarity that transcended her normal abilities, she understood what needed to happen. Darius, she called out using his first name for the first time. The resonance frequency. Set it to match your biorhythm. The human didn't hesitate, didn't question. He simply acted, adjusting the final setting before Moore could reach him. The causality engine's pulsing changed abruptly, its rhythm syncopating with a new pattern, a human pattern, chaotic and unpredictable. The swirling energy began to fluctuate, wildly, and Moore turned to it in horror. "What have you done?" he demanded. The answer came not in words, but in a cascade of temporal energy that engulfed the laboratory. As reality itself seemed to warp around them, Lyra's last conscious thought was the realization that in every future she had seen, her survival had always depended on one constant: the human whose unpredictability had just saved them all. Lyra, awakened to the gentle hum of medical equipment and the sterile scent of an Alliance recovery unit. Her shoulder throbbed dully beneath regenerative bandages, but the pain was secondary to the disorientation washing over her. For the first time in her life, she had no sense of how much time had passed. 14 days, came a familiar voice from beside her bed. Lieutenant Kava, Darius, looked haggard but relieved, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept properly in some time. "You've been in induced recovery for 2 weeks. She tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. The causality engine? Destroyed. When you told me to match its frequency to my biorhythm, it created what the science team is calling a temporal feedback loop. The device couldn't reconcile human unpredictability with its deterministic framework." Lyra nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. "And more?" Darius's expression darkened. Caught in the temporal backlash, his body was aged centuries in seconds. There wasn't anything left to recover. A fitting end for a Tellurian who had betrayed the most sacred principles of their kind. Lyra felt no satisfaction, only a profound weariness. "The hegemony?" she questioned, in disarray. The destruction of the engine created ripple effects throughout their command structure. Apparently, they'd already begun implementing temporal adjustments to secure their tactical advantage. He smiled grimly. Without those adjustments, several of their planned operations have already failed spectacularly. Lyra absorbed this information, but something felt wrong. There was a hollowness inside her, an absence she couldn't immediately identify. Then it struck her. Her precognition was gone. The realization must have shown on her face because Darius leaned forward with concern. "The medical team said there might be side effects from your proximity to the engine when it collapsed. Is it your temporal perception?" "It's silent," she confirmed, a flutter of panic rising in her chest. Since childhood, her ability to glimpse the futures had been as natural as breathing. Its absence left her feeling blind, vulnerable. "I can't see anything beyond this moment." Before Darius could respond, the door slid open to admit Admiral Vrex and a Tellurian dignitary Lyra recognized as Counselor Elysia from the Temporal Ethics Committee. "Commander Vasiliev," the counselor greeted her with formal respect. "Your service to the Alliance, and to our people specifically, has been noted at the highest levels." Admiral Vrex's reptilian features arranged themselves into what passed for a smile among his species. "The intelligence you recovered about the hegemony's temporal weapon has already prevented 3 additional facilities from becoming operational. You and Lieutenant Kave have quite possibly prevented a war." The praise felt hollow against the loss of her core identity. "Thank you, Admiral Counselor, but I should inform you that my precognitive abilities appear to have been compromised." "Not compromised," Counselor Elysia corrected gently. "Transformed." Lyra's silver eyes narrowed. "Explain." The counselor activated a holographic display above Lyra's bed, showing neural scans comparing her brain patterns before and after the incident. "The temporal lobe adaptations that allow Tellurian precognition are still present," Elysia explained, "but they've reorganized. Instead of processing probability branches, they appear to have specialized for something else entirely." "Something else?" Darius questioned. "Temporal anchoring," the counselor replied. "An extraordinarily rare adaptation, previously only theoretical. Instead of perceiving multiple futures, Commander Vasiliev may now have the ability to stabilize a single timeline against temporal disruption," Admiral Vrex interjected, "which, given recent events, could prove invaluable. The hegemony's research has unleashed temporal instabilities across several sectors. We need specialists who can contain these disruptions." Lyra struggled to process this information. Her entire identity had been built around her gift of foresight. Without it, who was she? What purpose could she serve? As if sensing her turmoil, Darius spoke up. Commander Vasiliev needs time to recover before any new assignments are discussed. The Admiral and Counselor exchanged glances before nodding in agreement. Of course, Vrex conceded. Take the time you need, Commander. When you're ready, contact Central Command. After they departed, silence fell between Lyra and Darius. Outside, the viewport, stars drifted past as the medical transport continued its journey back to Alliance space. They're wrong, Lyra finally said, her voice barely audible. Darius frowned. About your condition? About what happened? She turned to face him fully. My abilities haven't transformed. They've been focused. Since the moment I met you, my precognition has been changing, narrowing from infinite possibilities to specific outcomes. Understanding dawned in his eyes. The temporal bond you mentioned earlier. More than that. Lyra hesitated, struggling to articulate something that defied Tellurian philosophical tradition. When the engine collapsed, I experienced something impossible, a convergence of all timelines into a single fixed point. You. The human's expression reflected disbelief. Me? That can't be right. Humans are variable factors in temporal mechanics. We introduce chaos, not certainty. Exactly. For the first time since awakening, Lyra felt a sense of clarity. The causality engine was designed to force the universe into a state of perfect determinism. It would have eliminated all unpredictability, including humanity's unique temporal signature. But I'm just one human, Darius protested. How could I possibly anchor anything? Lyra reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his hand. The contact sent a jolt through her dormant temporal senses. Not a vision of the future, but a profound awareness of now, extending outward in all directions like ripples in a cosmic pond. You're not just any human, she said softly. You're the human who changed my future when it was supposed to be fixed. The one who creates a point of stability in my perception that no temporal weapon can disrupt. Darius remained silent, processing her words. Finally, he asked, what does this mean for you? For us? I don't know, she admitted. For the first time in my life, I can't see what comes next. It's terrifying. His hand turned beneath hers, fingers intertwining. Welcome to how the rest of us live every day. Despite everything, Lyra found herself smiling. Is it always this uncertain? Always, he confirmed. But that's what makes each choice matter. As the medical transport continued its journey through the stars, Lyra Vasiliev, who had once seen all possible futures, began to contemplate the strange new freedom of facing just one future at a time, anchored by the human whose very existence defied predetermined fate. And for the first time, she wondered if perhaps this uncertainty might be a gift greater than any precognition. 6 months later, the temporal anomaly research vessel Quantum Constant hung in orbit around Nexus Station, the massive Alliance scientific outpost constructed specifically to monitor the aftermath of the causality engine's destruction. From the ship's observation lounge, Lyra watched as supply vessels docked and departed in careful choreography. Beautiful, isn't it? Darius joined her at the viewport, offering a cup of the Tellurian herbal tea she'd grown fond of. Since their recruitment to the newly formed Temporal Anomaly Response Division, such quiet moments had become rare and precious. Efficient, she agreed, accepting the cup. I appreciate efficiency. He smiled, knowing her well enough now to recognize the subtle appreciation in her tone. 6 months of working together had forged a partnership unlike any in Alliance records. A human Tellurian team specializing in stabilizing temporal fractures left in the wake of the hegemony's failed weapon. Admiral Kexori wants our assessment of the Viridian anomaly by tomorrow, he reminded her. The mathematical models suggest it's expanding again. Lyra nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight. The simulations are complete. This one is different from the others. There's a resonance pattern I haven't seen before. Before Darius could respond, their communication devices chimed simultaneously. Priority 1 alert. the highest classification, Captain Ilani of the Quantum. Constant appeared on the holographic display, her feathered crest raised in alarm. Commander, Lieutenant, sensors have detected a massive temporal distortion forming near the hegemony border. Classification, Omega-level event. They exchanged glances. Omega-level meant potential timeline collapse, the worst-case scenario they'd been preparing for since the engine's destruction. Coordinates received, Darius confirmed. We're on our way to the bridge. As they hurried through the corridors, Lyra felt a familiar sensation, not the precognitive visions of her past, but the heightened temporal awareness that had replaced them. The closer they came to temporal anomalies, the stronger this awareness grew. The bridge was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Captain Ilani gestured them toward the central holographic display, where a swirling vortex of energy appeared to be tearing apart the fabric of space itself. It appeared 23 minutes ago, Ilani explained. Exponential growth rate. At current progression, it will engulf the Nixtel colony in approximately 6 hours. Population? Lyra asked. 15,000, came the grim reply. Darius studied the readings. This isn't just another fracture. The energy signature matches the original causality engine. A cold certainty settled over Lyra. Moore had a contingency plan, something triggered by his death or the engine's destruction. The science officer, a brilliant savant named Renix, whose multiple brain lobes could process parallel calculations, joined the discussion. Analysis confirms Tellurian design principles in the anomaly's structure. It appears to be some kind of temporal deadman switch. Can we neutralize it? Captain Ilani demanded. Renix's expression, all 6 of them, turned somber. Not from here. The anomaly has a self-reinforcing quantum lattice. It would require direct interface from within the event horizon. A suicide mission, Darius translated. Lyra studied the holographic representation, her enhanced temporal awareness reaching out toward the distortion. Unlike her former precognition, she couldn't see what would happen, but she could feel the currents of causality flowing through the anomaly, the pressure points where reality strained against unnatural constraints. Not necessarily suicide, she said slowly. The temporal anchoring ability Counselor Elysia identified. This may be what it's for. Darius turned to her sharply. You're not suggesting I am. Her voice was calm, decisive. My neural structure has been specifically adapted to counteract this exact type of temporal disruption. Theoretically, he argued, we have no proof it would work in practice, especially at this magnitude. Captain Ilani interrupted. I need options, not arguments. If Commander Vasiliev believes she can neutralize the anomaly, we should prepare accordingly. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparations. The science team outfitted a specialized shuttle with temporal shielding, while Lyra and Darius debated strategy. Their discussion grew increasingly heated as launch time